abolition. And I think I want to end with, if I can, with some reflections on abolition. When I say abolition, I mean, what kind of abolition do you think I'm talking about? Prison abolition, does that sound like it's possible? Or is it kind of very bizarre? Okay, anyway, I was talking about prison abolition. And so the abolitionist movement has a long history. And during various eras, activists have maintained that the prevailing conditions in prisons and jails, along with the failure of the prison to accomplish its announced goal, that constitutes the strongest argument for abolition. So we would talk about the 10-point program. We would talk about the Attica Rebellion and the way in which abolition was evoked during that rebellion. Okay. What might be helpful is for me to say that the notion of prison abolition, which, if we trace its genealogy, requires us to take up the work of the Black Panther Party. That prison abolition provides us a way to talk about the pitfalls of the particular version of democracy we inhabit, the particular version of democracy represented by U.S. capitalism. Capitalism has always produced problems that it can't solve. And that is even more obvious today. Capitalism produces problems that it is not prepared to solve. It has the means of solving these problems, but is not prepared to give up the drive for profit, to put things in a relatively simplistic way. So prison abolition requires us to recognize the extent to which the social problems, which the prison presumes but cannot solve, are embedded in the present social order. And it's the social order which will have to be radically transformed. Prison abolitionist strategies reflect an understanding of the connections between institutions we think about as disparate and disconnected. They reflect an understanding of the extent to which the overuse of imprisonment is a consequence of eroding educational opportunities further diminished by using imprisonment as a false solution for bad public education. Persisting poverty in the heart of global capitalism leads to large prison populations, which in turn reinforces the conditions that reproduce poverty. Does that make sense? So when I refer to prison abolition, I'm thinking about what was evoked by the Black Panthers, but I'm also thinking about the Du Boisian notion of abolition democracy. That is to say, abolition is not only, or perhaps not even primarily, about the negative process of tearing down, but it's also about building up. It's about creating new institutions. Du Bois, of course, very specifically referred to slavery and its legal disestablishment as an economic institution. But I think his argument, his observation that this negative process by itself was insufficient, that this has very deep resonances for prison abolition. Du Bois pointed out that in order to fully abolish the oppressive conditions produced by slavery, new democratic institutions should have been created. Because this did not occur, Black people encountered new forms of slavery, from debt peonage and the convict lease system to segregated and second-class education. The prison system continues to carry out this terrible legacy. It has become a receptacle for all of those human beings who bear the inheritance of the failure to create abolition democracy in the aftermath of slavery. And this inheritance is borne not only by black prisoners, but by poor Latino, Native American, Asians, and Asian and white prisoners. Its use as a receptacle for people who are deemed the detritus of society is on the rise throughout the world. So finally, in light of the global war on terror, what are the prospects for prison abolitionism? Well, you see, what I wanted to do was to urge you to assist us to develop a conversation, a broadly based conversation about prison abolitionism. Prison abolition and the abolitionism, we would all be abolitionists, right? Death penalty abolitionists, prison abolitionists. I want to, well, let me say the need to generate a conversation about the prospects for abolition is even greater now, because linked to the abolition of prisons is the abolition of the instruments of war, the abolition of racism, and of course the abolition of those social circumstances that lead poor men and women to look toward the military as their only avenue of escape from poverty and homelessness and lack of opportunities. So I really do want to conclude this meditation on the Black Panther Party with an appeal to you to think deeply about how you might contribute your voices, your ideas, your talents, your activities to the creation of a political culture that emphasizes dissatisfaction with the world as it is and urges us to imagine a better world. And not only to imagine it, but to work wherever we are for radical change.